It's June 2024 and I'm continuing my exploration of Åland beyond the capital Mariehamn by taking a journey across Fasta Åland to explore the history of this once fortress island. I've been staying in Mariehamn, capital of the Åland Islands, a Swedish-speaking semi-autonomous archipelago of Finland located in the Baltic Sea. I'm heading on a journey across the main island to visit fortifications in both the Swedish and Russian periods of rule on the islands, starting in Kastelholm. 25 kilometres northeast of Mariehamn and overlooking a fjord, Kastelholm is one of only 5 surviving Finnish medieval fortresses of significant size across the whole of the country and the only medieval fortification on Åland. Construction started in the 1380s on what is now the south side of the complex. The castle was originally built on a small island surrounded by moats, but over time land has filled in some of the moats, with the castle now firmly connected to the surrounding land. The first mention of the castle is in 1388, when it's mentioned in the contract of Queen Margrethe I of Denmark, where a large part of the inheritance of the first occupier of the castle, Bo Johnson Grip, was given to the Queen. The castle's heyday was during the 15th and 16th centuries. Major improvements to the walls and buildings were carried out from 1485 onwards. The castle became a popular destination for Gustav Vasa in the period before he became King of Sweden to come hunting on the castle grounds. The castle hunting grounds were protected by law, limiting those who could hunt them to just the castle's governor and the king. In the 16th century, a shipyard developed in the fjord by the castle that at one point employed 50 shipwrights. Gustav Vasa had 3 wives and countless offspring. His oldest son with his first wife became Eric XIV of Sweden on Gustav's death in 1560, but his reign was marred by increasing insanity and arbitrary violence, which resulted in his dethroning by his half-brother John, who then became John III of Sweden in 1569. Despite ending a despotic rule, there were still elements of Swedish aristocracy which wished to restore Eric to the throne, and so for the remainder of his life he was imprisoned in a number of castles across Sweden and Finland, including a period in the autumn of 1571 when Eric was held in Kastelholm. At that time, Kastelholm was held in the fief of the Queen Dowager Catherine Stenbock, a political enemy and stepmother of Eric. Being Gustav's surviving third wife, she was also stepmother to John III. In 1599, the castle was conquered by the future Charles IX of Sweden in a war against his brother and then King Sigismund. The use of cannons caused significant damage to the structure of the castle, and it wasn't until 1631 that that damage was fully repaired. The importance of the castle soon faded though, as Åland, rather than being its own province within the empire, was merged with Åbo, modern-day Turku, and the castle's status as an administrative centre was lost to the larger city on the Finnish mainland just 3 years after the damages had been repaired. Witch trials took place in the castle in the 1660s, but from the end of the century the site was beginning to decay. In 1745, that process was sped up in a major fire that burned down large parts of the structure. What remained continued to be used as a prison for a short while, but by the 1770s, the buildings were abandoned. During the 19th and 20th century, the grounds were partly used as a granary for storing grains prior to taxing, though much of the building was used as a convenient quarry for local farmers. A restoration programme started in 1982 and continued for the rest of the decade. The castle opened as a tourist attraction in the early 1990s. Today, most of the site has been left as a pretty ruin, but parts have been restored to include some museum and exhibit space to tell the story of the castle. With its location on the edge of the fjord, it is surely one of the most picturesque castles in the world. Next door to the ruins of the castle buildings, and on land that will one time have been part of the castle, is the outdoor museum of Jan Karlsgården. The museum presents period-correct buildings from across the island, pulled together to represent what life as a peasant in the 19th century, living and working on a farm, would have been like. The museum is modelled on the ethnographic museums of Skansen in Stockholm that first opened in 1891 and Sari in Helsinki that opened in 1909. There had been plans for an open-air museum on Åland from the 1920s, but it wasn't until 1931 that the first windmills were relocated to the site. The museum got its name from the estate of Jan Karls, who lived in the village of Bambola, about 13 kilometres from the site of the museum. His house was moved piece by piece from the village to the museum to form the main building of the site. Since then, about 20 more buildings have been brought from across the Åland Islands to help build the collection. The central part of the collection is around the main farmhouse, surrounded by other dwelling houses, such as cottages, along with barns and loft sheds. Opposite the farmhouse are the stable, ox stall and sheep sheds that would have defined a 19th century farmyard. The site is open all year round, though the buildings themselves are only open to look round inside during the summer months. Just on the outer edge of the open-air museum, and in the location it's always been in, is the Vita Björn, or White Bear, prison museum. And it's this building that caused the final abandonment of Kastelholms Slott. Opening in 1784, it served as a remand prison for nearly 200 years, only closing in 1975 when prison facilities at Åland were centralised in Godby, the second largest settlement on the island. Half of the building was the residence of the prison guard and his family, whilst the other side held the cells. Whilst the guard's residence has been kept as it would have looked, the 4 cells have been designed to show the development of the criminal punishment system on the islands in the early 1800s through the 1850s, (1900s), and up until the 1950s. Outside the original storage sheds and the stockade that was built around the site to keep the detainees in, a high-security prison complex, this wasn't. Since 1985, the former prison has been open to the public to look around during the summer months. Nine kilometres southeast of the Swedish fortifications of Kastelholm is the Russian fortress of Bomarsund. The main building of Bomarsund, and essentially the only part of an even larger complex that was ever completed, was the largest building ever constructed in Åland. The first plans for Bomarsund were being drawn up in the 1810s, less than 2 years after Russia had gained Finland, including the Åland Islands, from the Swedish Empire following the Finnish War of 1808. Acting as the first line of defence against the Swedish from attacking their new possessions, the fortress had to be built big enough that it could withstand a long siege. The early plans were based on the use of bastions, but with cannons and firearms becoming more common, the bastion system was becoming obsolete, so the plans were amended to use bomb-proof brick walls to create a curved external wall to protect the cannon and everything inside the wall. The initial plans were abandoned in 1820, but in 1828 Tsar Nicholas I ordered new drawings of construction work on the fortress, finally started in 1832. The main fortress building built over 12 years between 1832 and 1844, though the fortress being able to be used from 1839. With the completion of the main fortress building, the works to widen the fortifications over the rest of the headland and neighbouring islands began, with a number of watchtowers being constructed between 1842 and 1852. Building work was still underway when, on the 8th of August 1854, a combined French and British fleet sailed into the Sound to kick off the Battle of Bomarsund, an 8-day naval bombardment that resulted in a decisive victory for the Anglo-French fleet and the capture of the fortress. The Battle of Bomarsund formed part of the Ålani War, Ålanti being the Finnish variant of the Swedish Åland, a series of naval battles that took place in the Baltic Sea between March and September 1854 and April to December 1855. The main reason was to hem in the Russian fleet in the Baltic Sea so that it wouldn't be able to support and would require resources being diverted away from the Russian fleet in the Black Sea, which was fighting the Crimean War against the Ottomans, supported by their British and French allies. Following the end of the Battle of Bomarsund, the French and British navies realised that it would be impossible to keep control of the area without a large year-round force. So on the 2nd of September, they planted explosives around the whole of the site and blew the fortress to pieces, leaving the limited shattered remains that stand to today. The fall of Bomarsund was seen in France as a great victory and is remembered with an inscription on the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. In the UK, the battle was remembered with the naming of a newly built pit town north of Newcastle as Bomarsund. As part of the 1856 Treaty of Paris that ended the Crimean War, the Russians were allowed to keep the Åland Islands as part of the Grand Duchy of Finland, but only on the agreement that they would be permanently demilitarised. As a result, the ruins of Bomarsund represent the most recent and most successfully destroyed of the fortifications on the island. Ever since their destruction, the site has been a tourist attraction, with a new purpose-built visitor centre opening in 2022 to accompany the ruins. The fortress sits at the very eastern edge of the main Fasta Åland Island. Beyond here, the narrow Bomarsund Strait, crossed by the Bomarsundsbron, marks the start of the smaller islands and skerries that make up the northeastern archipelago of Åland and mark an end to my journey across the main island. Mariehamn is the main access point to the Åland Islands, linked by regular overnight ferries to Helsinki in Finland, Stockholm in Sweden and Tallinn in Estonia from the western harbour close to the centre of town. Mariehamn Flygplats is about 4 kilometres from the centre of town and has direct flights to Helsinki Vanta with Finnair and Stockholm Arlanda by Amapola flying as Populair. Both Helsinki and Stockholm are major international hubs, with Helsinki focusing on flights to Asia due to its proximity to the polar route over the North Pole to shortcut to the Far East. Stockholm is the largest hub in Scandinavia, with connections across Europe, the Middle East, Asia and North America.